Hello, you're watching World Talks on TVP World. My name is Sascha Fahrbach. In the longest State of the Union address in recent history and facing low approval ratings and a Supreme Court setback on tariffs, President Donald Trump used the speech on record to defend his trade agenda, immigration crackdown, and a firm stance toward Iran, while also outlining efforts to broker an end to Russia's war in Ukraine. He cited ongoing talks in Geneva and emphasized the human toll of the conflict as European leaders reaffirmed support for Kyiv. Joining us now to understand the legal and geopolitical stakes is William Worcester, Assistant Professor of International Law, Hague University of Applied Sciences. Good to have you back on TVP World. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So I want to start, this was the longest State of the Union. In terms of just the first couple takeaways for you, what stood out here from that speech?
Well, I don't know how many of your viewers will have ever seen an American State of the Union address before. This was in many ways very traditional. There's a lot of applause. There's a lot of one side sitting and the other side standing, mentioning some people who have been brought in who might receive an award or so. But beyond that, this was really just classic Trump. It was very familiar to a lot of Americans. This was essentially a campaign speech. He would have given more or less the same type of speech on the road to his supporters. Very little evidence of him having any interest in reaching out to the other side and striking any compromises or trying to bring the Democrats along. This was just him with his typical approach of sort of pummeling the opposition. But one thing in particular that jumped out at me is the frequent use of I have done, no one else could have done this. Not really saying things like we or my party or my administration, which is what we usually see in previous State of the Union addresses. So taking a very personal view of who he is, his achievements are, and really not paying much attention to Congress or any other actors.
Mm-hmm. As you said, classic Trump, me, myself, and I, some would say. Many will be now used to this kind of candor, this kind of messaging. At the same time, with some of the things, I don't want to go and fact check any of this right now, but from the sense of what you get from the economic achievements that he's touted, from tariffs, you name it, how, let's say, realistic will this be digested by the electorate? Will this be something that he can actually convince them of, or will people doubt his various achievements that he's listed?
Well, you're exactly right not to even attempt to do a fact check on this. One of the most notable things is that he tends to frame or characterize any loss as a win, or to deny any losses even existing. We saw this with the Supreme Court loss, which has been quickly characterized as a win. So he does to some degree exist in a bit of an alternate reality. But the difficulty right now is that he and his party are at historic lows in the opinion polls. Under 40% of the American support him and his party and the policies that they've adopted. And the United States is, of course, about to go into a midterm election when the entire House of Representatives is up for election and 1/3 of the Senate is up for re-election. And internally, they are frightened. A lot of members are retiring. They're just running. A number of members are quite certain they're going to lose their seats. So there's a lot of talk about how can they adjust voting rules, how can they ban certain voting practices, requiring voter ID, for example, to try to encourage more votes for their side. So there's a lot of these kinds of manipulation techniques that are going on right now. But it appears that the American public do not care for the current path that the country is on. And what's remarkable about this, and remarkable about this speech in particular, is that Trump is doubling down. He doesn't seem to be making any gestures to the other side or to anything other than maybe messaging to try to convince the American public of his particular proposals. So all projections right now are that the Republican Party will go in for a catastrophic loss. And then we'll have to see whether or not he's able to really compromise if the Democrats are in control of Congress.
Mm-hmm. Still months ahead for the midterm, so a lot can happen in that. But I want to get also into a bit of foreign policy. I mean, he did reference Iran, but also curious about NATO and Ukraine. Now, in Ukraine in particular, he said that he's working very hard to end that war, also listing the losses. We're not quite sure which side of the losses he referenced there. But he said also that he will make peace wherever he can. So that kind of messaging, what does that say to Ukraine? It will be very different to what 4 years ago President Joe Biden said, a very different kind of speech. What's the message there, ultimately, in your mind, for Ukraine and Europe?
Well, Trump, one of his various campaign promises when he was running for election was that he would settle the war in Ukraine in one day, 24 hours, I suppose. That, of course, has not happened, and that was a pretty exaggerated sense of his own ability to influence the side. I'm not sure that he's really perceived anymore as really a good faith actor in much of this, because most of the proposals that he's made to Ukraine are more or less accept what the Russians are demanding in the situation and stop the fighting. His sort of view, I think, of foreign relations and international relations is not really one of compromise. It's really more of zero-sum game, which is how he approaches domestic politics also as well. And so I think he expects Ukraine to essentially, in order to stop the fighting and to stop the dying, to essentially give up and concede and give the Russians what they want in order to reach peace. So that, of course, is completely opposed to what the European position has been, because, of course, Europe experiences this right on their doorstep. And so along with other issues like Greenland and some of these other problems, has caused quite a big rift within NATO. And so we've heard from both the Prime Minister of Canada and the Chancellor of Germany deep skepticism about even the continuing viability of NATO as a functioning framework for achieving peace. So I don't have a lot of confidence that Trump is really going to reach any type of resolution of his own personal willpower. I think it's going to have to be a concerted effort between the Europeans and Ukraine and Russia in order to reach some type of solution.
I want to come in on that. We mentioned NATO as well, and let's say that unity or ripples or let's say challenges. And he also mentioned this in his speech. He also said very much, quoting here, NATO countries are friends and allies. They are, repeating, they are friends. So he started with this very strongly, then also saying that he's gotten them to pay 5%, which they weren't. At the same time, if we do step back for a moment and we can view it as this some kind of achievement, will this go down well in some ways in some avenues of his party, of the electorate? What does this do for NATO cohesion? Because it starts off, well, as you said, classic Trump, but he does mention it in a very, let's say, amicable way.
Yeah, indeed. The increase in NATO spending is an interesting issue to point out. So Trump has always taken the perspective that the United States pays more into NATO and doesn't really get any benefit from it. And this is really a gross mischaracterization of the way that NATO functions. The U.S. pays a very, very small amount of money into NATO as an international organization. Very little. It pays a huge amount into its own military. And that's really what he's counting. So he's counting the numbers as how much do European countries contribute to their own militaries. So they have indeed increased spending. I'm not sure to what degree that really is just because he has tried to twist their arm into doing it. It's probably much more so that they see the reality happening in Ukraine. And they know that there is this massive growing geopolitical risk to them. And it is in their own self-interest to increase their own spending. And of course, that maybe the United States is no longer a reliable ally. And so they need to increase the spending on their own. Maybe Republicans, maybe the American public might think that that's a bit of a win, but it's only a win in the sense that other countries may be spending more on their own militaries. The United States is not going to reduce the amount of money that it spends on its own military. And in fact, Trump has asked for a really substantial increase in the amount of money that the U.S. spends in its own military. So whatever the U.S. might say withdraw in terms of its very meager funding for NATO is going to be hugely offset by any increased spending on its own military. So I don't know if, from a budgetary perspective, anyone's going to see any difference in terms of funding for military operations.
Mm-hmm. And then also, I want to come back to this new global tariff. I mean, he referenced 15%, but actually official documents say it's 10% now in effect. I mean, this whole back and forth, especially with the European Union, I mean, there's still that EU-US trade deal. We're uncertain where that stands. Now, from a European perspective, those watching from Brussels and other capitals, what do they take away from yesterday's speech in D.C.?
Well, the Supreme Court decision is, of course, a massive loss. I mentioned earlier that they're trying to characterize it as a bit of a win. There's not really any way to really make that as a serious argument. It was a massive loss. The Supreme Court said that Congress holds the power to issue tariffs. The president cannot do that. And while they were focusing on one particular law on setting tariff rates, they did come out stating that as a general matter, of course, that the tariffs fall within the purview of Congress. So Trump has now said that he will continue the tariffs, but the only legal option for him is temporary tariffs and, as you mentioned, a flat global tariff rate, which is either 10 or 15. As you rightly said, it's unclear which one it is, which means that whereas before he was attempting to use different tariff levels, different tariff rates for different countries as a means to essentially bully them based on the policies he liked or didn't like or what he perceived of as trade imbalances. He could really tailor that country by country and then reach potentially individual agreements. Now he has this one hammer for all countries in the world. So countries like China and India that have very high tariff rates now have a huge benefit because their tariff rates will be reduced down to what Trump has said is the global minimum. Mm-hmm. Countries like Switzerland, the EU, will of course now potentially lose. We'll have to see where this agreement stands, but they may potentially lose as their rates may actually be going up.
All right, so still much more to analyze in the future, I'm sure. We'll have you back for that. Thanks so much. Really appreciate all those insights. Professor William Worcester there, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you for watching. Concludes World Talks, but stay right here on TVP World for more news and commentary. Goodbye.